When a store clerk mocked Keanu Reeves and told him he couldn't afford a luxury watch, no one expected what would happen next. He walked away silently, but not because he was embarrassed. He had a promise to keep, a secret to uncover, and a stolen legacy to reclaim. What he did next left the entire store in stunned silence. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The winter wind rolled softly through the streets of Geneva, brushing against stone buildings and echoing lightly off their glass facades. Keanu Reeves walked slowly down Rue de Rhône, the famous avenue of luxury, where polished windows displayed things few dared to touch, let alone buy. His hands were tucked into the pockets of a worn canvas jacket. A black beanie covered most of his hair, and his boots carried the dust of a recent hike from somewhere quiet. He wasn't there to draw attention, but attention found him anyway. He paused outside a sleek store with gold trim and tall glass doors. Inside, the lights shimmered against dozens of high-stand watches, each one displayed like a work of art, time frozen in 100 different ways. Keanu stepped in, and a small bell chimed faintly. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. A young store clerk with slicked-back hair and a tailored vest caught sight of him. His eyes narrowed. Tourists wandered into these places all the time, taking selfies, asking to try things they couldn't pronounce. Wasting time. Keanu moved slowly along the cases, his eyes focused not on the price tags, but on the design. The way the gears moved. The elegance of restraint. He wasn't a collector, not really, but something about precision craftsmanship fascinated him. The clerk stepped forward with a forced smile. "Looking for something specific?" he asked. Keanu nodded. "Just admiring the mechanics. I've heard you carry the Lapine Grand Tourbillon series. Is that one of them?" He motioned toward a glass display case in the center. The clerk's smile cracked into something else. He gave Keanu a once-over, eyes stopping on the frayed edge of his jacket sleeve. "That piece?" he scoffed. "Sir, that's a $500,000 tourbillon. It's delicate." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Could I take a closer look?" The clerk shook his head. "With respect, we prefer to show pieces like that to serious clients, collectors, people with appointments." Before Keanu could respond, the store manager appeared, a tall man with a silver tie clip and the confident air of someone who'd turned many browsers into customers. He looked at the situation, then at Keanu. "Is there a problem here?" the manager asked. The clerk gestured subtly toward Keanu. "He wants to handle the Lapine Grand. Didn't seem appropriate." The manager glanced at Keanu's boots, then his face. Something in his expression hardened. "Sir, our store carries very rare timepieces. We kindly ask that visitors refrain from touching anything unless accompanied by a consultant. For security and preservation reasons, of course." Keanu stood silently, the kind of silence that says more than anger ever could. He nodded once. "Understood. Thank you." And with that, he turned and walked toward the exit. The bell chimed again as he stepped into the cold. The street was still. His breath curled in the air. Across the street, he paused, hands still in his pockets. He looked back at the store window. Not with bitterness, not with pride, with something else. He stood there for several seconds, watching the reflection of his own face over the glitter of watches he hadn't touched. Then his gaze shifted to something far more subtle. A reflection in the corner. A young man behind the counter, maybe an intern or a junior associate, had watched the whole exchange, and he looked embarrassed. For Keanu, it wasn't about the watch, not really. It was about the way we treat people when we think they can't give us anything. The young man behind the counter had said nothing during the exchange, but as Keanu paused across the street, his eyes locked with the actors through the glass. Something passed between them. Not recognition, just a silent understanding. The junior associate gave the slightest nod, almost imperceptible, like a quiet apology. Keanu returned it with a barely tethered smile, then turned and walked away, his boots tapping lightly on the cobblestones. As he made his way down the block, Keanu passed cafes where tourists sipped espresso and debated which ski resort to visit next. He passed a woman cradling a violin case, a couple arguing gently in French, and a vendor folding up postcards of Mont Blanc. The city moved around him, unaware that anything unusual had just happened. But inside the store, a different kind of silence had settled. The manager returned to his back office, satisfied with having protected the store's image. The arrogant clerk turned back toward the display, smirking faintly. Then the junior associate spoke. "Do you know who that was?" The clerk glanced up. "Some hiker with a hoodie and bad shoes?" The young man stared at him, eyebrows raised. "That was Keanu Reeves." The smirk faded. "What? No way. Google it. Look at his eyes. Look at his walk. That was him." The clerk grabbed his phone and started typing frantically. The associate added, "And he asked to see the Le Pine Grand. He knew what it was. Most people don't." The silence deepened. The weight of realization settled in. The store clerk's confidence cracked. He stared at the door as if expecting Keanu to walk back in and say, "Just kidding." But the street was empty now. Back outside, Keanu sat on a bench facing the lake. The icy wind brushed through his beard, and the water reflected the overcast sky like glass. He pulled out a thermos from his jacket. Tea, still warm, and sipped quietly. He wasn't angry, not really, but the encounter lingered. It wasn't the first time he'd been judged by appearance. It wouldn't be the last. In his life, he'd met people who had everything and still lacked grace, and others with almost nothing who gave more kindness than the world ever noticed. He thought about the way the manager had called the watch delicate, as though his touch alone would taint it. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He took another sip of tea. He didn't need a watch to know what time it was. Moments later, a small group of children ran by the lakeside, chasing each other and laughing. One of them stumbled, fell near Keanu's feet, and looked up wide-eyed. "Are you okay?" Keanu asked gently. The boy nodded, rubbing his elbow. Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a small bandage from a pouch he kept for exactly things like this. "Here," he said, handing it to the boy. "Thanks, mister." One of the older kids stopped and looked at him carefully. "You look like that guy in the movies," she said. Keanu winked. Lots of people say that. They ran off again, shouting and smiling. And just like that, the moment passed. But the feeling didn't. Sometimes, the real value of a thing isn't in its price or its rarity. Sometimes, it's in the way someone chooses to carry themselves, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. Across the lake, the watch store glimmered under artificial light. Keanu didn't look back this time, because he already knew. The real time was now, and it was ticking in a direction that would surprise everyone. Something was about to begin. Keanu Reeves wasn't in Geneva for a movie premiere, a photo shoot, or even a vacation. No red carpets, no cameras, just a quiet man chasing a quiet promise. The cold wind off Lake Geneva whispered around him as he stepped out of the cab that morning, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket. The city was beautiful this time of year. Cobblestone streets brushed by golden leaves, old-world buildings wrapped in elegance. But Keanu wasn't here for beauty. He was here for a watch. One watch. A timepiece no longer on any official registry, no longer for sale. A watch tied to a man who meant more to him than most people ever knew. His name was Frank Martin, a legendary stunt coordinator. The man who taught Keanu how to fall properly, how to take a hit without getting hurt, and more importantly, how to rise again after life knocked you down. Frank didn't just shape Keanu's physical training, he shaped his soul. In a time when young actors were treated like commodities, Frank treated him like a human being, a kid with doubts, fears, and potential. Frank had been family. But Frank died 2 years ago. Quietly. Unexpectedly. A stroke in his sleep. No headlines, no tribute reels. Just gone. Keanu hadn't been able to attend the funeral. He was overseas on a film set. But weeks later, he received something in the mail. A letter. Handwritten, shaky penmanship. From Frank's daughter, Lily. The envelope smelled faintly of old books. The letter inside had been folded twice and carried more than ink. It carried memory. "Dear Keanu," it began. "I know my father always spoke highly of you. He told me once that you weren't just a student to him. You were like the son he never had. That meant something to him, and it means something to me now." The letter went on to describe her grief. The silence in the house. The boxes of film reels and old props stacked in the garage. And then, near the end, something more curious. "There was one thing Dad always kept close," she wrote. "A watch. Custom made. Stainless steel case with the year 1992 engraved under the crown. He said it was the first gift he bought himself after your first big film together. He wore it every day on set and every day off. But it's gone. It disappeared during the estate cleanup. I was told by someone in the auction world that it may have ended up in Europe, maybe Geneva. I don't know what good this letter will do, but I thought you'd want to know." Keanu didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone, called her, and said the words she hadn't expected to hear. "I'll find it." Not, "I'll try." Not, "I'll see what I can do." Just a promise. A quiet vow from one man to another, even across the veil of death. Lily had cried on the other end of the phone, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. With that, Keanu boarded a plane to Switzerland. Not for fame, not for business, but for something far more rare. Loyalty. The kind that doesn't care how many years have passed. The kind that lives on long after the cameras stop rolling. The watch wasn't just valuable because it was rare. It wasn't about price tags or craftsmanship, though Frank had spared no expense when he custom ordered it. It was about what it symbolized. 1992 was the year everything changed for Keanu. The year a risky new action film pushed his body past its limits. The year he doubted whether he had what it took. The year Frank stepped in like a father and helped him believe in himself. That watch had been on Frank's wrist the day Keanu nailed his first stunt sequence. The day the director clapped him on the back and said, "Now that's a real action star." Keanu remembered Frank's proud grin more than the praise. And that watch had gleamed under the stage lights as Frank raised his arm in a silent salute. It was more than a watch. It was a relic of trust, of brotherhood, of becoming. And now, according to Lily's contact, it might be in Geneva, quietly circulating among high-end collectors who valued stories even more than diamonds. That narrowed things down, but not by much. Geneva was home to some of the most secretive private dealers in the world. They didn't sell to walk-ins. They didn't advertise. They whispered to each other in members-only lounges, traded heirlooms across cigar smoke and aged whiskey. Keanu knew he'd have to move carefully. No agents, no assistants, just him, a notebook, and the contact name Lily had scribbled in the corner of her letter. Marcel Fournier, a former auction house executive turned private consultant. No phone number, no email, just an address. Rue des Vieux Grenadiers 11. A converted warehouse tucked between a bakery and a contemporary art gallery. Keanu showed up unannounced the morning after arriving in town, dressed in his usual quiet layers, hair tied back, expression unreadable. A receptionist glanced up from a thick book. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Keanu replied. "But I have a name." He slid the envelope forward. Marcel's name was circled in ink. The woman studied him for a long moment. then picked up a landline phone. After a hushed conversation, she nodded and motioned to a black door behind the desk. Marcel was older than Keanu expected. Thin frame, gray hair combed neatly, a velvet scarf tucked into his shirt collar. He looked more like a retired philosopher than a collector of watches. But his eyes held the sharpness of someone who'd seen too much and never forgot a detail. "You're not here for publicity," Marcel said, not as a question. "Then come in." They talked for over an hour. Keanu didn't name drop, didn't flash money. He just told the story about Frank, about the watch, about the promise. Marcel listened quietly, then leaned back in his chair. "There are rumors," he said at last. "A piece fitting that description appeared at a closed door showing last fall. No documentation, but the engraving matches. The current holder is a private man. No listings, no public identity. Can I speak to him?" Marcel hesitated. "He deals in emotional value. He doesn't sell often, and when he does, it's not for money." Keanu nodded. "I'm not offering cash." Marcel studied him again. "Then maybe, just maybe, he'll hear you out. But I warn you, he doesn't like being watched." Keanu walked through the narrow alleys of Geneva's old quarter, his footsteps quiet against cobblestone worn by centuries. A light mist hovered in the air, giving the historic streets an almost cinematic stillness. This wasn't the polished part of the city tourists came to photograph. This was a quieter layer of Geneva, tucked beneath the surface, where forgotten things were traded by people who remembered everything. He stopped in front of a weathered door, tucked between two shuttered antique shops. No sign, no indication of what was inside. But he knew. He knocked once, then again. 3 slow taps. A small slot opened at eye level, revealing a pair of suspicious gray eyes. "Reeves," Keanu said. The door creaked open, revealing a small man in a cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses. His hands were ink-stained and trembled just slightly. This was Laurent, once the finest watch restorer in Switzerland. Now retired, now off-grid. Now someone you had to know someone else to even find. Inside, the room smelled of oil, parchment, and brass. Gears lay in tiny dishes. Loop glasses and old magnifiers rested on velvet cloth. It was a world paused in time. Laurent motioned for Keanu to sit at a long wooden bench. He offered no greeting beyond a nod. Instead, he picked up a small screwdriver and began working silently on a cracked caseback. The tick of a mechanical clock somewhere in the room filled the space. "You came for the story," Laurent finally said without looking up. "I came for the truth," Keanu replied. "The watch. Does it exist?" Laurent paused, exhaled slowly, and nodded. "I saw it once. 3 years ago. A man brought it in. Said it needed a cleaning before the exchange. I knew it immediately by the engraving." He stood and walked to a locked cabinet. From it, he pulled a small photo, a blurry snapshot taken in secret. He handed it to Keanu. In it was a dark leather box, opened just enough to reveal a glint of steel and a sliver of engraving. "Time forgives all things," Keanu whispered, recognizing the line. Laurent sat again, his face lined with a memory that seemed heavier than the air. "Your friend, the one who wore it, he must have meant a lot to you." "Did," Keanu said quietly. "He believed in me when no one else did. I owe him more than I can say." Laurent nodded as if he already knew. "The man who brought it in, he wasn't the owner, just a courier. High-end, discreet. The real owners are something else entirely." Keanu leaned in slightly. "Belli call themselves the Ark," Laurent said, almost under his breath. "A circle of private collectors, very wealthy, very secretive. They don't buy for passion, they buy for power. Heirlooms, artifacts, things tied to legacy. They hoard history like it's currency. Keanu absorbed every word. So, the watch is part of their collection now? Laurent nodded. It was never listed publicly. That watch, it's off books, quietly acquired, never to be sold. You were laughed at because they recognized you. They know who you are. But they also know you don't belong to their world. Keanu looked down at the photo again. They think this is just about money or ego. Laurent studied him for a long moment. It's not, is it? No, Keanu said. It's about keeping a promise and honoring the man who helped make me who I am. Laurent sighed, setting down his tool. Then I'll tell you what I know. But be careful. These people don't like being followed, and they don't forgive mistakes. Not even ones made for love. Laurent opened a narrow drawer built into the side of his workbench and retrieved a folded envelope, yellowed at the corners. He placed it in front of Keanu with deliberate care. This is the contact card of the courier who brought the watch to me. He goes by the name Elias. I don't know if that's his real name. He handles private acquisitions for the Ark. I've only seen him twice. He doesn't deal with outsiders, especially not without a very good reason. Keanu took the card. No number, just a name and a crest embossed in black foil. A stylized archway flanked by two serpents. They like symbols, Laurent said. They believe they're curators of civilization, that the past is something to be possessed, not preserved. But don't mistake this for an auction house. The Ark is not about commerce, it's about control, and they protect their pieces like dragons sitting on gold. Keanu ran a finger along the edge of the envelope, then slipped it into his jacket pocket. Why tell me all this? Why help me? Laurent looked down at his stained hands. Because I've spent my life restoring things others had thrown away, but some things, some stories, they aren't meant to be forgotten. That watch, your friend's watch, it didn't belong to the Ark. It belonged to someone who wore it through every fall, every stunt, every quiet act of courage behind the camera. That man gave a piece of himself to the art most people never see. You honoring him? That's the kind of restoration I wish I could still do. Keanu's expression softened. He used to say the world didn't need to see you to feel what you gave. Just show up, do the work, let the rest take care of itself. Laurent smiled faintly. He was right. But people like the Ark, they believe the only stories worth telling are the ones they can own. That's why you being you, walking into their world, asking for something they think belongs to them, it threatens the entire illusion. And they'd rather insult me than admit it, Keanu said. They want you to walk away, Laurent replied. They want you to feel small, disposable. Keanu stood slowly. But I'm not. Laurent rose as well, nodding. No, you're the one thing they can't buy. Someone who remembers what things mean. And that's why they'll try to stop you. Keanu reached for the door, then paused. How do I find Elias? There's an event, Laurent said carefully. It's not public, but it's where the collectors gather. In 2 days, a private auction will be held at a chateau outside Geneva. You won't find it listed anywhere. You'll need an invitation. Keanu raised an eyebrow. I can't get you one, Laurent said. But there's a woman who might. Her name is Celeste Durand. She used to authenticate timepieces for the Ark before she, disagreed with their methods. She's off their grid now, but not hard to find if you ask the right people. Keanu opened the door. Thank you. Laurent offered one last warning. Be careful, they guard their myths with silence. And if you pull too hard on the thread, the whole tapestry might unravel. Outside, the mist had thickened, blurring the city into soft outlines. But Keanu's path had never been clearer. The watch was real. The Ark was real. And so was the promise he'd made. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about something far more dangerous in the eyes of the powerful. It was about remembering. Keanu stood outside the same luxury watch store on Rue de Rhône, his reflection caught faintly in the polished window. The streets of Geneva moved behind him with the elegant precision of the city itself, tidy, composed, efficient. But inside that store, something had felt off from the very beginning, not just the humiliation. Something else. A performance happening behind layers of etiquette. This time, he wasn't there to shop, he was there to observe. He stepped in quietly, dressed just as he had the first time. Jeans, a black t-shirt under a worn jacket, and soft-soled boots. No entourage, no announcement, no pretense. The clerk who had laughed at him before wasn't at the counter. A new employee greeted him with a polite nod, though the look in her eyes suggested the same assumptions were already forming. He didn't engage. Instead, he slowly moved to the side of the showroom, appearing to browse casually. Then it began. A subtle shift in the room's energy. The door opened, and a hush fell over the floor like a blanket. A well-dressed man entered, tall, graying at the temples, wearing an immaculate three-piece suit. He moved with assurance and indifference, as if he belonged to another time. A manager emerged from the back almost immediately, abandoning a younger couple mid-sentence. Staff straightened jackets, adjusted ties, every eye turned toward him. Victor Sorin. Keanu had heard the name in passing through Lawrence contacts, a former investment banker who'd walked away from Wall Street after a public scandal. Now he was something more elusive, a private collector, rumored to be one of the founding members of the ARC. Keanu kept his distance, watching Victor glide toward a corner of the store that most people never noticed. A single unmarked door opened with a buzz after he flashed a small black card to the glass. It closed behind him. Keanu moved slowly toward the same area, pretending to admire a mid-century Rolex. But just before he reached the glass partition, he saw it. A shadow of motion on the other side. And then, a watch. The engraving caught the light briefly through the bulletproof glass. It was nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for. 3 faint words, hand-etched on the edge of the dial's inner ring. Time forgives all. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. That was it. James Hayward's watch. The one his daughter Emily had described in her letter. The one Keanu had seen on his mentor's wrist the first day they'd met, on a dusty set in Arizona, back when he was just a hopeful actor with a busted knee and no idea what to do next. The label on the glass display read something else entirely. A fake provenance, French origin, auctioned in 2009. No mention of Hayward, no mention of anything real. A clerk walked by, spotting Keanu near the restricted section. Her polite expression turned cold. "Excuse me, sir, that area is reserved." Keanu didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the case. "Is that one for sale?" he asked, gently. She blinked, slightly thrown off. "That's part of a private collection," she said. "You'd need an invitation just to inquire." Keanu nodded slowly, then with a calm voice that masked the storm in his chest, he said, "Thank you." He stepped away, returning to the public floor, but every muscle in his body stayed alert. His mentor's watch was here, but it didn't belong to them, and he wasn't going anywhere. Keanu left the boutique without making a scene, but something had shifted inside him. The casual indifference, the way that watch had been hidden in plain sight. It was more than elitism. It was erasure. Someone had deliberately buried the story behind that watch, just like they'd buried the man who once wore it. And that kind of silence spoke volumes. He found a quiet spot at a nearby cafe with a clear view of the shop's entrance. From there, he watched the rhythm of comings and goings. It wasn't about timepieces, not really. The store was a gateway. The Ark wasn't just a nickname. It was a funnel of exclusivity where history became a commodity, and only the powerful got to decide which memories deserved to survive. 2 more black sedans arrived over the next hour. Men in tailored suits, women in minimalist couture, none of them browsing. They were ushered quietly through that same unmarked door, each one offering the same subtle black card to the reader by the glass. Keanu sipped an espresso, thinking about Hayward. James Hayward wasn't just a stunt coordinator. He'd been Keanu's anchor during the hardest years of his early career. When Keanu tore his ACL during a motorcycle accident just before filming his first major action role, it was Hayward who taught him how to move again, how to fall without fear, how to stand without flinching. And when Keanu lost his partner to illness, it was Hayward who showed up with silence, whiskey, and the kind of friendship that didn't need words. And now, Hayward's story was locked behind bulletproof glass, disguised as luxury. Keanu opened his phone and dialed the only number he trusted in Geneva. Laurent picked up on the second ring. "I saw it," Keanu said. A pause. "The engraving, clear as day." Laurent exhaled. "Then they have it, the Ark. I warned you, my friend. These are not collectors. They are curators of influence. History, to them, is a status symbol. Can you get me in? Not a member. But I know someone who was. Someone who got out. Can you trust him?" "I don't know," Laurent said. "But I trust you enough to try." That night, Keanu returned to his modest apartment overlooking the Rhone. He opened the leather folder Emily had sent him, the daughter of the man whose memory he was chasing. Her handwritten letter still smelled faintly of cedar. She'd included a childhood photo of herself on her father's shoulders. Around his wrist was that watch. Same dial, same band, same words. Time forgives all things. Keanu stared at the photo until the city lights dimmed. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about keeping a promise. Returning something sacred to someone who had already lost too much. The next day, he met Laurent in a small bookshop tucked beneath a stone archway near Plan Palais. In the back room, surrounded by dusty shelves and forgotten volumes, an older woman waited. Her name was Adelaide Vernier, once a museum curator in Paris, now living quietly under a new name. She'd once been invited into the Arcade, briefly, long enough to learn its secrets. "They buy artifacts of meaning," she explained softly. "Not for passion, but for leverage. Every item has a story, but they strip it bare, repackage it, use it as currency in their private world." "Weigh the secrecy?" Keanu asked. "Because truth is fragile," she replied. "And these men, they trade in memory, the way others trade in money." Keanu leaned forward. "I don't want to expose them. I don't want to fight them. I just want one watch." Adelaide studied him for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and handed him a card. Black, unmarked. "This won't last more than a day. Use it carefully." Keanu took it. A silent understanding passed between them. Tomorrow he would return to that store not as an outsider, but as someone the Ark could no longer ignore. The late afternoon sun filtered through the gauzy curtains of Keanu's rented apartment overlooking Lake Geneva. The light was soft, golden, almost too peaceful for the storm he felt rising inside. He sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea growing cold beside him. In his hand, a worn envelope, yellowed at the edges frayed as though it had been opened and closed too many times to count. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Delilah's. He slid a finger under the brittle flap and gently pulled out the contents. First, the folded receipt, thin, translucent paper from a now-defunct Beverly Hills jeweler, dated June 1992. The name Samuel Brighton printed clearly. His late friend. His mentor. The man who'd once stood in front of him on set during a failed pyrotechnic test to shield him from a blast. The serial number of the watch was there too, unmistakable, and beneath it, the words etched into the back of that timepiece, "Time forgives all things." He set the receipt down, heart thudding. Then he unfolded the second page. The letter. It was written in blue ink, scrawled in a hurried, emotional hand. Delilah's voice came through with every line, trembling, but direct. The employee. "I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to send this, but if you're reading it, I guess I finally did. Or someone found it. Maybe that's for the best. I need you to know something. I've tried to let it go, to believe that Dad's death was just one of those terrible things that happen without reason. A freak fall down the hotel stairs. An accident. That's what the report said. But I never believed it, not for a second." Keanu leaned back slightly, closing his eyes, the words sinking in like ice water down his spine. "Dad told me the week before he died that he was working on something big. He didn't give me details, but he said it was going to shake things up in the industry. Said he was tired of being quiet, tired of seeing other stuntmen get hurt, used up, tossed aside. He said there were people in power, producers, insurers, even unions, covering up serious injuries, people getting paid off to keep quiet. Dad wasn't going to stay quiet anymore." Keanu looked at the floor, remembering how Sam used to talk after long days on set. The way he carried pain in his joints like old memories. The way he joked about busting bones for billionaires. "Caller, he told me he was going to testify," the letter continued. "He said he had evidence, paperwork, recordings, and the watch. He said it was a gift from someone he once helped keep out of a lawsuit. That it had history tied to all of this. That it reminded him what time could do, how it either heals or hides. He never explained more, just that if something happened to him, I should find that watch." Keanu swallowed hard, the air feeling heavier. This wasn't just about a promise anymore. This wasn't about sentiment. It was a trail, a lead, a clue that Sam had left behind, maybe even unknowingly. A timepiece that someone had wanted badly enough to kill for. And now it was sitting behind bulletproof glass, under a fake label, in the hands of people who didn't want it found. Keanu reread the last paragraph of Delilah's letter, slowly, as if each word carried a second meaning beneath the ink. "I don't have proof, Keanu, just a daughter's instincts, and a gut feeling that's haunted me every night since I got that call from the hotel manager. The police said there were no signs of foul play, but they never checked the security footage. Never interviewed the men he'd argued with 2 days before. They dismissed him like just another stunt guy who partied too hard and fell down the stairs. But you knew him. He didn't drink. He didn't slip. Someone made it look like he did. Please, if you find the watch, don't just give it back to me. Find out what really happened." Keanu folded the letter with slow, deliberate care. He slid it back into the envelope, but not before glancing once more at the small line Delilah had written at the very bottom, just below her signature. Time didn't forgive what they did, but maybe you can. He sat in silence, watching the light on the lake begin to fade. A sense of purpose pressed against his chest like a weight that was finally taking shape. He had come to Geneva to fulfill a promise, to return a sentimental piece of someone's past. But now, it was more than that. It was a piece of evidence. It was a message frozen in time. Keanu rose from the table, moved across the apartment, and opened the drawer where he kept a small notebook filled with scribbles and names. At the top of a clean page, he wrote one name in all caps: Samuel Brighton. Then beneath it, he began sketching connections, dates, locations, anyone still alive from the stunt circuit in '92, friends, enemies, whispers of unpaid hospital bills and stories swept under studio carpets. He circled the receipt's serial number. That was key. If someone had gone to the trouble to relabel the watch, it meant they were hiding it, not selling it, which meant it mattered more than they wanted to admit. And if The Ark had it in their private collection. There was a good chance they knew exactly where it came from and what it could expose. A knock at the door startled him. He paused, alert. Geneva was quiet at night. Visitors were rare, and he hadn't told anyone where he was staying. He crossed the apartment and looked through the peephole. No one, just the empty hallway. But on the floor, a small envelope. No return address, no markings. Keanu bent down slowly, picked it up, and returned to the kitchen. He opened it carefully. Inside was a typed message, just a single line. The Ark doesn't forgive. Walk away. No name, no signature. Keanu exhaled quietly. So they knew he was here. They knew he was asking questions, and they were trying to scare him off. He looked again at the watch's receipt, at the letter in Delilah's handwriting, at the words Sam had once engraved into the back of that timepiece. Time forgives all things, but not this time, not this injustice. He wasn't just going to bring the watch home. He was going to bring the truth with it. And whoever had stolen Sam Brighton's life, they were about to realize they'd left behind more than a timepiece. They'd left behind a witness, one who hadn't forgotten, and who wasn't afraid to remember. The rain in Geneva had returned by morning, misting over the cobblestone streets like a memory that refused to fade. Keanu walked with quiet purpose, the envelope from the night before folded in his jacket. The weight of its contents, both physical and emotional, had not left him. That letter changed everything. The receipt confirmed the watch's provenance, but the daughter's confession had lit a deeper fire. This wasn't just about returning something sentimental, it was about finishing something that had been stolen, a life, a truth, and a warning. He reached Laurent's modest watch shop just after opening. The bell above the door chimed gently as he stepped in. Laurent looked up from his bench, his magnifier still clipped to one eye. "You look like a man who didn't sleep," Laurent muttered, setting his tools down. Keanu approached slowly, placing the weathered envelope on the counter. He removed the documents inside, the receipt, the photo, and finally, the handwritten letter. Laurent took his time. He didn't speak as he read, but Keanu saw the shift in his eyes. When he looked up, his voice was softer. "This is his daughter's handwriting?" Keanu nodded. "She believes he was killed," Laurent said. "Sheen thinks he uncovered something dangerous," Keanu replied. "Something he planned to expose." Laurent exhaled deeply. "Then the watch isn't just sentimental anymore. It's evidence." Keanu leaned in slightly. "You said you'd seen this watch before." "I did. It came into my workshop nearly 8 years ago, under a different name, no address, no background, just a note with very specific servicing instructions. I remember because of the engraving." He pointed to the receipt. "Time forgives all things." That phrase stayed with me. Keanu listened carefully, absorbing each detail. I opened the back of the case. What I found inside was unmistakable. Custom Swiss movement, a modified mainspring with precision, not used in commercial models. That kind of work is rare. Once I saw the engraving, I knew this was no ordinary commission. "You can prove it's the same one?" "Easily," Laurent said. "That movement has a signature anomaly. One gear was replaced decades ago with a non-standard one from an old Omega. I remember it because it took hours to calibrate. If I can open the back again, I'll know instantly. But it's locked away in that private vault." Laurent nodded solemnly. "And they won't just let you in, not unless you're one of them. The Ark guards their collection like royalty guards a crown." Keanu hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since the moment he'd walked in. "If I can get close to it, if I can find a way to bring it out into the open, would you help me prove it?" Laurent looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a tiny toolkit, aged, precise, and clearly cared for like sacred instruments. "I'll help you," he said, but only under one condition. What's that? You don't just recover it for her. You tell the whole story. You expose what happened to him. Keanu met his eyes. I promise. Laurent nodded, then slowly closed the pouch and tucked it into his coat pocket. His fingers lingered on the fabric for a moment, as if drawing strength from the tools he'd used for a lifetime. Then, he stepped closer to Keanu, his tone shifting from reflective to practical. If you're serious about this, he said, you'll need more than a promise. You'll need a plan. Keanu's mind was already working. He had seen the layout of the store's interior, the back section, the security patterns, the way Victor Sorin had been ushered in like royalty. He didn't need to steal the watch. He needed to get close enough to it for Laurent to verify what it was. If he could do that, maybe the rest would fall into place. Do you know anyone who's part of the Ark? Keanu asked. Laurent shook his head slowly. Not directly, but I've heard names. People who fund acquisitions, who compete over rarities like it's a game, the kind of people who measure value in status, not story. He paused, then added, there's an annual gathering. They call it a showcase, but it's more of a bidding war. Only the elite get invitations. Keanu considered that. When? Soon. 2 weeks, maybe less. But you won't get in unless someone vouches for you. Keanu's eyes narrowed. Unless I become someone worth vouching for? Laurent raised an eyebrow. You're Keanu Reeves, globally recognized. But in their world, fame without control means nothing. They think I'm an outsider, someone beneath them. That's exactly why they laughed at you? Keanu fell silent for a moment. Then, with deliberate calm, he asked, what happens if I confront them directly? You risk being shut out entirely, or worse. Laurent stepped toward the window and pulled the curtain slightly. This isn't just a collector's club. There are whispers about how they keep their holdings quiet, how people who interfere disappear. Keanu didn't flinch. If this watch proves what she thinks it does, then they've already hurt people to protect their power. Laurent turned back to him. So, what will you do? Keanu looked down at the receipt again. The faded ink, the signature, the date. His fingers brushed the edge of the paper like it was a page from a lost chapter of someone's life. He saw the face of his old mentor, heard his voice, remembered the advice he'd given when Keanu had nearly walked away from acting after an injury. You only walk away, the man had said, if you know you've done everything right. But if there's even one thing left unfinished, you go back and finish it. I'll get inside that showcase, Keanu said at last. And when I do, I'll need you nearby. Laurent's eyes gleamed with something between caution and respect. You'll be walking into a lion's den. Then I better not walk in alone. They stood in quiet agreement for a moment, the air between them heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. Outside, the clouds broke slightly, and a shaft of soft light filtered through the window. Laurent glanced toward it. Funny, he murmured. Time forgives all things, but only if the truth is allowed to speak. Keanu gave a small nod. Then let's make sure it does. Keanu didn't sleep much that night. The image of the watch behind the glass lingered in his mind like a challenge. Not just for its rarity or sentimental value, but because of what it represented. A broken promise. A lost man's voice silenced too soon. A daughter left with questions and grief. Now, he had more than memories to honor. He had a truth to recover. The next morning, he moved with quiet precision. He kept to the shadows, his movements cautious but deliberate. With Laurent's help, he booked an appointment at the same store, but this time under a pseudonym. Victor Hardley, a private investor based in Luxembourg with a taste for rare European collections. A fabricated email address, a burner phone, and a tailored message requesting a discreet consultation with their private acquisitions team. Everything crafted to sound like money and mystery. The store responded within hours. Mr. Hartley, we would be honored to accommodate you. Kindly arrive Friday evening at 7 p.m. Our private collection specialists will be available. The tone was markedly different from the arrogance they'd shown days before. A name and image and an illusion of wealth. It changed everything. Keanu didn't flinch. He just marked the time and prepared for what came next. Laurent met him again, this time in the back room of a quiet repair shop near Lake Geneva. He carried with him a compact scanner, small, square, disguised to look like a glasses case. It's a micro-frequency serial reader, he explained. Reads engraving depths and layering patterns through reinforced glass. You'll have to be close, within 8 inches. But if you pass this across the casing, it'll confirm everything, date, serial, and the engraving inside. Keanu took it, nodded slowly, then hesitated. How did you even come by something like this? Laurent's expression tightened. Let's just say some collectors want confirmation before they make six-figure mistakes. And some restorers grow tired of lies. He placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder. But be careful. They'll smile at you while planning your exit. That night, Keanu prepared the last piece of the plan. He made contact with a store janitor named Elias, a young man in his early 20s. Elias had recognized him during Keanu's earlier visit, but unlike the clerk or the manager, he hadn't mocked or judged. In fact, Elias had slipped a small note into Keanu's coat pocket as he left the store. Big fan. If you need anything, I work nights. Keanu found him near the alley behind the store. Elias was leaning against a dumpster, smoking, nervously glancing around. You sure you want to do this? Keanu asked softly. Elias shrugged. I've seen what they hide in there. You're not the first one they've tried to humiliate, but maybe you'll be the first to do something about it. Keanu offered a hand. Elias shook it firmly. Tonight, Keanu said. We don't take anything, just look. Just prove. Elias nodded. Meet me at the side entrance, midnight. I'll keep the back hallway open. Keanu turned to leave, then paused. Thank you for trusting me. Elias looked him straight in the eye. You've played heroes your whole life. I've always wondered what you'd do in real life. As midnight approached, the plan clicked into motion. The street outside the boutique was dark, the lake mist drifting in low like a veil. Keanu arrived in a plain black jacket, no disguise beyond simplicity. He moved through the alley, boots quiet against cobblestone, and reached the side entrance just as the clock struck midnight. True to his word, Elias had left it slightly ajar. Inside, the back corridor was dim and silent, only the faint hum of security systems breaking the stillness. Elias stood beside a cleaning cart, pretending to restock paper towels. When he saw Keanu, he gave a quick nod and handed over a magnetic access card. This gets you past the second door, he whispered. But the showroom is camera monitored. I disabled the feed for 15 minutes. No more. You'll have to move fast. Keanu tucked the card into his pocket and moved through the hallway like water, smooth and quiet. The scanner sat ready in his hand. When he reached the inner showroom, he paused at the edge of the doorway. The private vault section looked even more imposing in the dark. Velvet-lined cases glowed softly under sensor lights, each piece carefully arranged in deliberate distance, like museum relics. But one case, in particular, caught Keanu's eye. The watch. Still tucked inside its reinforced glass prison, still misidentified with a vague manufacturer name and year, still hiding in plain sight. He approached carefully, steady hands, calm breath. He passed the scanner across the glass in slow, precise movements. A tiny green light blinked twice. Then, a beep. He glanced at the screen. Serial number confirmed. The last 3 digits matched the receipt from 1992. Then came the next reading. Engraving match. Time forgives all things. Keanu felt something shift inside him. proof. Real, living proof that the story was true. The watch hadn't been lost. It had been stolen. And worse, it had been hidden here, sold and hoarded like a trophy. He reached into his coat pocket for the tiny camera to take the image. But the lights changed. Not the soft glow of display sensors, but the harsh white of overhead fluorescents snapping on. Footsteps echoed down the hallway behind him. Keanu turned slowly, hands already raised. 3 men entered the room. Suited, quiet, not law enforcement, but close. One carried a tablet. Another wore earpieces and carried a sidearm holstered under his coat. The third, taller, walked with the confident stillness of someone used to power. Their badges didn't say security, they said control. The tallest stepped forward. "We're going to need you to step away from that case, Mr. Reeves." Keanu said nothing at first. He calmly placed the camera on the nearest display table, then turned his palms forward. "I'm not here to take anything," he said. "Just admiring history." The man tilted his head. "This area is restricted. I made no attempt to steal. No force. No lock broken. You accessed this floor without clearance, with a borrowed card, from someone who believes in justice." The 3 men exchanged looks. "And what justice?" the tall one asked. "Do you think is owed here?" Keanu looked back at the case. This watch belonged to a man who died trying to expose a truth. And someone decided his legacy was worth more as a secret. The silence was thick. Then the shorter man with the tablet stepped forward and whispered something to his colleague. The tall man stared at Keanu, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled faintly. "You need to leave now, and take your story with you." Keanu nodded. "I expected as much." But as he turned to go, he added one quiet line over his shoulder. "Stories have a way of finding the light, even the ones you bury." The silence in the boardroom was colder than the marble floors beneath Keanu's boots. The glass walls overlooked Geneva's twilight skyline, but inside, everything felt sealed off, timeless and airless, like a vault. The private security team that had intercepted him had said nothing, only escorted him upstairs through a private elevator, past corridors that smelled of leather and control, and now, seated at the far end of the sleek, dark wood table, was the man Keanu had only seen from a distance until now. Victor Soren didn't rise to greet him. He didn't need to. He exuded ownership the way others wore watches. Quiet, polished, deliberate. His silver cufflinks caught the recessed lighting as he folded his hands on the table and studied Keanu like a misfiled document that had wandered into his empire. "You don't belong here, Mr. Reeves," Soren said at last, voice smooth as lacquer. "But you're persistent. That makes you dangerous." Keanu remained standing. "I'm just trying to return something to its rightful place." Soren smirked, then glanced at the armed guards lining the glass wall behind Keanu. "And so you broke into my facility, scanned a private collection, posed as someone else?" He opened a thin folder and flipped it with practiced ease. "You've committed at least 6 violations of Swiss commerce law tonight." "I didn't steal anything," Keanu replied. "But someone did, 31 years ago. The watch belonged to a man named Thomas Burke." "Ah, yes, the letter, the receipt, the sentimental quest." Soren's voice dripped with performance. "Tragic story, really. His daughter writes you and you come galloping across the Atlantic like some noir film hero. I admire the theater of it." "It's not theater," Keanu said calmly. "It's a promise." Soren tapped the folder. "This," he said, "is a collection of pre-drafted legal filings. Defamation, libel, trespassing, theft of trade secrets. It's designed to keep anyone like you from ever uttering our name in public again. But it's not really you I'm worried about." He slid the folder forward slowly, like he was offering a glass of poison. "It's her, Claire Burke. She works with children now, doesn't she? Quiet life, good reputation. Be a shame if an anonymous tip suggested she was exploiting her father's death for attention, fabricating stories. Financial desperation. Keanu's jaw tightened. Sheem has nothing to do with this, he said. Sheem has everything to do with this, Soren replied. Because you care, and that is your weakness. There was a silence then, long and deliberate. The guards didn't flinch. The city lights outside flickered like distant stars. Then Soren made his offer. Sell you the watch. $5 million. That's the price of sentiment and silence. Keanu looked at him, really looked. Not just at the tailored suit or the monogrammed pen resting beside a gold business card holder, but at the eyes. Cold, calculating. The kind of man who didn't just collect history. He erased it, repackaged it, and sold it to the highest bidder. Keanu remained still, his eyes locked on Victor Soren's. I'm not paying you to silence a memory, Keanu said quietly. And I'm not letting you rewrite the truth just because you can afford to. Soren leaned back slightly, resting his elbow on the armrest. His smile thinned. Then you're not getting the watch, he replied. And if you leave this room and attempt to go public, every door you think you can knock on will be shut. I have friends in Hollywood, government contracts, media channels that owe me favors. You won't be able to whisper without it echoing back as a scandal. Keanu's voice was low but firm. All that power, and you're afraid of a story? Soren's smile vanished. I'm not afraid of stories, Mr. Reeves. I'm afraid of losing control over them. He tapped a small button beneath the table. A screen behind him blinked to life, displaying surveillance stills of Keanu inside the store, of Laurent entering through a side door earlier that week, of the janitor discreetly passing something to Keanu. Every angle, Soren said. We've documented your little adventure. You'll be painted as an aging actor, meddling in things he doesn't understand. Conspiracy theorist, Haskian. You'll drown in legal delays and media mockery before you ever reach a courtroom. Keanu stepped forward slowly, closing the distance between them. You said something earlier, that I don't belong here, he said. You're right. I don't. Because I'm not here to win your game. I'm here to end it. Soren raised an eyebrow. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, Keanu replied. You think I care about status or image or career? I've lost too many people to protect illusions. That watch doesn't belong behind bulletproof glass. It belongs in the hands of a daughter who never got to say goodbye. You call that weakness. I call it purpose. Soren's jaw tensed. Keanu turned toward the door, but before he reached it, Soren added one last venom-laced sentence. If you walk out, you're walking away from your career, from everything you've built. Keanu paused with his hand on the door handle. I'd rather lose everything than lose who I am, he said. Then he walked out. No guards stopped him, no alarms rang, but the air behind him felt like a knife at his back. He didn't have the watch. Not yet. But he had something Soren could never buy. The truth. And now, he was going to find a way to make sure the world heard it. The plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle just after dawn. The skies over Paris were draped in soft gray, the kind of color that held both melancholy and clarity. Keanu stepped out quietly, carrying only a single black travel bag. No entourage, no fanfare. Just a man with a mission, and now a deadline. He made his way to a tucked-away cafe in the 6th arrondissement. It was small, quiet, and shielded from the city's noise, chosen not for ambiance but for discretion. Clara Deschamps was already seated at the corner table, scribbling into a notebook with a fountain pen that had clearly seen more wars than interviews. She didn't look up when he sat down. She didn't need to. I read the letter 3 times, she said, sliding the creased pages across the table. And the receipt matches the serial database. Keanu nodded. I need it to be undeniable. She finally looked at him. Sharp brown eyes lined with years of staring too closely at uncomfortable truths. If we do this, there's no halfway. The Ark doesn't issue denials. They erase people. I know, he said quietly. They've already threatened her. And me. Clara leaned back. Then you also know they'll come for both of you the moment we go live. Keanu looked down at the worn envelope, the one that had carried the secrets of a man who once risked his life for him on set. A man who stood in for him during a stunt gone wrong, taking the fall that should have paralyzed Keanu. He owed this more than silence. Then let's make it so loud they can't bury it. Clara smiled for the first time. Small, tired, but real. We'll need more than letters and scanned receipts. A story is only powerful when it has blood in it. I have more, Keanu replied. He placed a thumb drive on the table. Photos. The watch behind glass. The serial number scan. Video footage of their security detaining me. And the threats. Everything. Clara stared at the drive, then picked it up as if it weighed more than gold. We'll need to back this up in 3 locations. Server, satellite, safe. It's already done, Keanu said. Laurent helped. Clara raised an eyebrow. The Ark's old watch whisperer? That's brave. Who wants this story out as badly as I do? She paused for a long moment, then opened her notebook again. Here's what we do. We craft the article, evidence heavy, zero speculation. I'll record a documentary segment to accompany it, featuring your voice but not your face. We'll launch both at once, tied to a public event. Something they can't control. Keanu nodded slowly. I already know when. I'm going back to the store. I'm going to ask for the watch again. This time in front of cameras. Clara's pen stopped moving. You're making yourself the fuse? No, Keanu said. I'm making myself the match. She looked at him, really looked, and finally understood. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about legacy. It was about a man keeping a promise. To a daughter, to a mentor, to the truth. All right, she said. Then let's light it properly. By the time Keanu landed back in Geneva, the plan was already in motion. Clara had spent the last 48 hours mobilizing her trusted network, editors, documentarians, tech support, and one former intelligence analyst who now specialized in digital exposure protection. Every file had been mirrored across international servers. Every name, timestamp, and transaction was cataloged. They had one shot. It had to hit hard and clean. Keanu checked into a new hotel under a different alias. From his window, he could see the glimmering skyline and the unassuming watch boutique at the base of the Rue de Rhône. Beneath its elegant facade, it looked just like any other high-end storefront. But now he saw it for what it was. A vault built on silence. Early the next morning, he walked to the store wearing the same jacket as before. No disguises, no assistant, just himself. But this time, his walk wasn't hesitant. It was precise. Across the street, a journalist with a concealed camera stood ready. 2 tourists with phone cameras, actually Clara's contacts, stood nearby, blending into the crowd. Inside, another ally waited, a quiet woman pretending to browse diamond-studded timepieces, her wire mic active. Keanu stepped through the boutique doors. The clerk at the counter looked up and tensed. It was the same young man who had dismissed him days ago. "Good morning," Keanu said politely. The clerk didn't answer. He simply pressed a button beneath the counter. Keanu heard the subtle click of the internal security alert, but kept going. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Sorin," Keanu said. "He's not available," the clerk replied, his voice stiffer now. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Keanu said calmly, "but I've come to buy a watch." The store manager appeared within seconds. Her smile was tight. "Mr. Reeves, we've already explained." Keanu raised a hand. "That I wasn't welcome. I remember, but I have a very specific piece in mind." She glanced toward the back hallway, the one that led to the exclusive vault room. Which watch? The one labeled as an anonymous 1992 piece. Silver, minimalist face, with an engraving just faintly visible beneath the dial. You know the one. Her smile faltered. That model isn't for sale. I'm prepared to make an offer, Keanu said. Publicly? A hush spread across the boutique. Phones were now pointed at the windows from outside. Clara's contacts had activated live streams. Notifications spread across Twitter, TikTok, and niche collector groups. Keanu Reeves just walked into a Geneva boutique and asked to buy a restricted watch live. Victor Sorin appeared like a ghost through the mirrored hallway. His composure was intact, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. "Mr. Reeves," he said smoothly, "you've made your point. Let's not make a circus of it." "This isn't a circus," Keanu replied. "This is a question." He held up a small photo. Just one. The receipt, the serial number, the name. The same serial engraved on the watch now locked behind bulletproof glass. "I'm not here to make trouble. I'm here to keep a promise. That watch belonged to a man who died trying to make the film industry safer. It was stolen, and now it's here, mislabeled and locked away. I'm asking for the truth, not just for me, for his daughter, for everyone who's ever been silenced." Soren's jaw tightened. The store buzzed with whispers. The cameras caught it all. His silence, the discomfort, the refusal to respond. Outside, Clara's article had just gone live. The headline read, "Hollywood's Quiet Scandal, the watch that unlocked a hidden history." And the world was watching. The lighting inside the boutique shimmered like the inside of a jewelry box. Glass cases sparkled beneath the glow of strategically placed spotlights. Tonight, the store was hosting a luxury preview event. Champagne flowed, violinists played, and invited guests flaunted their status in silk, velvet, and diamonds. Keanu Reeves entered unnoticed at first. He wore a plain black suit with no tie, his hair slightly tousled, his demeanor quiet. But as he stepped fully into the room, the murmur of conversation shifted. A few heads turned, then more. Within moments, phones were discreetly raised, and whispers filled the air. He wasn't on any guest list, but that didn't matter now. He was the event. He approached the front counter with quiet intention. The same clerk who once ridiculed him now stood stiff and unsure. Keanu offered a soft nod and placed a document envelope on the glass. "I'd like to purchase the timepiece in the back showroom," he said simply, gesturing toward the hidden chamber beyond the velvet rope. The clerk opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a notarized appraisal from an independent Swiss horology authority, as well as a copy of the original receipt dated 1992. The serial number was clearly printed, matching, irrefutable. "Sir, the clerk stammered. But before he could speak further, the atmosphere shifted again. Victor Sorin entered from the far side of the showroom, flanked by 2 staff members and a security escort. His presence silenced the room. He wore a dark tailored suit and an expression that mixed amusement with warning. "You again," Sorin said coolly, strolling forward like a king inspecting a challenger. "I must say your persistence is almost impressive." "I'm here to make a purchase," Keanu replied calmly. Sorin looked to the documents on the counter, then back at Keanu. "This is a private piece, Mr. Reeves. It's not listed for sale, not to the public. You know how this works." Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and slowly withdrew a $1 bill. Crisp, unmarked. He set it gently atop the paperwork. "Home dollar," he said, "and this story goes away quietly." The crowd around them stilled. Even the music had paused. A few gasps broke through the silence. Some laughed nervously, unsure if this was a publicity stunt or a scene from a hidden camera film. Soren's brow arched. "Is this a joke?" he asked, amused but cautious. "No," Keanu replied. "That watch belongs to a family. Not to a display case. Before Soren could deliver his cutting response, a woman's voice rose from the back of the room. "Unless you'd prefer the full story to air tonight." All heads turned. Clara Deschamps stepped into the spotlight, followed by a documentary film crew with visible press badges. They moved as a coordinated unit, with 2 cameras already rolling, microphones extended, and lights activating. Soren's smirk faltered. The store manager, now visibly sweating, rushed over. "Mr. Cerrone, we can't have a media incident here, not during the preview." Clara stood her ground. "This isn't about drama," she said clearly. "This is about history, about justice, and about returning something stolen." Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice or point fingers. He simply turned to face one of the cameras. His voice was quiet, steady, unwavering. "Some things don't belong behind glass. They belong with family." Victor Soren's face tightened. His jaw clenched as he processed what was unfolding, not in some hidden vault, but in front of the world. He turned toward the manager, voice low but clipped. "Get them out of here, all of them." The manager hesitated, glancing nervously between Soren, Keanu, and Clara's film crew. A few of the store's elite guests had already started recording on their phones. Some whispered names like Keanu Reeves and Clara Deschamps, while others exchanged confused glances. A scene was already unfolding, and there was no rewinding it. Clara stepped forward, her voice cool and steady. "You should think very carefully before you try to silence us. We're not here to steal anything. We're here to document a piece of stolen history being returned to its rightful place." Soren's eyes locked on hers. "There are consequences for this," he said darkly. "Exactly," she replied. "For everyone involved." At that moment, one of the documentary team members raised a small tablet and tapped the screen. The large media screen behind the store's reception desk flickered to life. Footage played. Brief clips of the original letter from the mentor's daughter, the appraisal, and an interview excerpt with Laurent explaining the unique inner mechanism of the watch. The guests fell silent. Soren's mask of power began to crack. For the first time, a flicker of fear entered his expression. Not because of Keanu, but because of the truth he could no longer bury. Keanu stepped forward slowly, gently placing his hand on the glass case. Inside, the watch sat gleaming under soft lighting. The same watch, engraved with the words, "Time forgives all things." A memory trapped in metal and gears. A promise made, and now about to be kept. "I'm not here to destroy reputations," Keanu said, addressing Soren directly but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not here to burn your empire down. But I made a vow to a grieving daughter, and I won't leave without this watch." The manager looked pleadingly at Soren. "Sir, this is becoming a liability." More phones had come out. A live stream had started. People around the world were now watching this unfold in real time. Soren turned toward Keanu. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You think this ends with a watch? You're a fool if you believe that." Keanu met his gaze evenly. "No, I think this starts with one." A tense moment passed between them, 2 men standing at the edge of very different worlds. One built on secrecy, the other on resolve. Soren nodded once, bitterly. "Unlock it," he said to the manager. The glass case was opened with a soft hiss as the magnetic seal released. The manager reached in with gloved hands and delicately removed the watch. He offered it to Soren for approval, but Soren didn't even look at it. He simply stepped back, folding his arms in silent surrender. The manager turned and handed it to Keanu. Keanu held the watch carefully in both hands. It was heavier than he remembered. He turned it slowly, and there it was. Beneath the polished casing, the engraving still visible. "Time forgives all things." He looked back at Clara. "Let's go." As he walked out of the store, the cameras followed. Not as a celebrity, not as a man seeking revenge, but as a quiet figure of promise, delivering something stolen back to the people who'd lost it. And behind him, the empire of secrets that once laughed at him now stood exposed, silent behind the glass. The flight to Canada was quiet. Keanu sat by the window, the watch wrapped gently in a linen cloth, secured in a small wooden box resting on his lap. He didn't sleep. His mind kept drifting to a film set 30 years ago, a moment when a man named Charlie Mendez had taken a hard fall to protect him during a high-speed motorcycle stunt. The world had moved on, but Keanu hadn't forgotten. He arrived in a modest neighborhood just outside of Vancouver. Snow lined the edges of the sidewalk, melting in the afternoon sun. The address was etched in faded numbers on the edge of a weathered mailbox. As he approached the front steps, the door opened slowly. A woman stood there. Mid-40s, long brown hair streaked with gray, a look of disbelief softening into recognition. "Mr. Reeves?" she said gently. He nodded, holding up the box like it was made of glass. "I believe this belongs to you." Her eyes welled up instantly. She didn't reach for the box. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped him in a hug, sudden and unspoken. "You found it," she whispered. "Oh my God, you really found it." Inside, the house was filled with warmth, the kind that comes from memories more than money. A few photos of her father lined the fireplace mantel. One of them was from a set. Her father smiling beside a younger Keanu, both covered in fake blood, grinning after a long day of filming. She took the box with trembling hands, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened it slowly. When she lifted the watch into the light, her breath caught. The engraving was still clear. "Time forgives all things." "Hell wore this every day," she said. "He used to tap it when he was nervous, said it kept him grounded." She turned the watch over gently in her fingers. After the funeral, it was just gone. No one could explain it. We thought maybe it had been misplaced, but I always knew someone took it. Keanu nodded, choosing his words with care. "I don't know exactly what happened that night, but I know it wasn't lost. And I know he didn't go quietly." She looked up, surprised. "You know?" He sat across from her, placing a hand on the table. Someone didn't want him to speak about the injuries, the money, the things that were hidden in the industry. He was going to blow the whistle, and they knew it. A long silence passed between them. Then she looked down at the watch again, tears sliding freely now. "I used to think no one cared. He wasn't a star, just another name in the credits. But you remembered." "I owed him," Keanu said softly. "He saved my life once, on set. But more than that, he believed. People like him mattered. He told me once, 'Never forget the crew. They build the world the stars get to shine in.'" She laughed through her tears. "That's him. That's exactly him." They sat like that for a long time, in the quiet hume of an old kitchen, warmed by old stories and shared silence. She set the watch down carefully, as if afraid it might vanish again. Then she stood up and walked to the counter, returning with a photo album thick with years. She opened it between them. Inside were dozens of behind-the-scenes snapshots. Her father rigging wire pulls, taping bruised wrists, laughing with grips and stunt drivers who had all disappeared into the dust of forgotten credits. Keanu leaned closer, recognizing faces. He pointed to one photo, a candid moment from a dusty desert shoot. That was the day he broke a rib and didn't tell anyone until wrap. He didn't want production delayed. She nodded. He did that a lot. Came home bruised, limping, but he never complained. He loved his work. He loved the family it gave him. She paused. He loved you, too. Called you the one actor who looked the crew in the eyes. That meant everything to him. Keanu looked down. His throat tightened. He taught me more than I realized. how to fall right, how to stand when no one's watching. She turned to the last page of the album. There was a single photo, taped with care. It showed her father holding her as a child, both of them laughing in the sun. "I sent you that letter because I didn't know where else to turn. I didn't even expect you to answer." "I read every word," Keanu said. "And I made a promise. To you. And to him." She traced the edge of the photo with her finger. "I'm glad you did. Not just because you found the watch, but because someone finally cared enough to uncover the truth." She stood again and placed the watch on a small velvet stand near the window. The late afternoon light caught its face. It shimmered softly, like something returned home after a long journey. "You know," she said quietly, "he would have been proud of you. Not for being famous, but for this, for showing up, for fighting when it would have been easier to forget." Keanu didn't answer right away. He stood, brushing his coat from the chair, letting the moment settle. Then he nodded once, voice low. "That means more than anything." As he walked to the door, she followed. Just before he stepped out, she said one last thing, so soft he almost didn't hear it. "Almoy said the good ones never have to announce themselves. They just do the right thing and leave quietly." Keanu looked back, eyes stinging with emotion. He gave her a gentle smile and a small wave. Then he stepped out into the cool evening air, the sky painted in streaks of pink and gold. The wind was crisp but clean, the kind of cold that cleared your head. He walked slowly, his breath visible in the air. Each step felt lighter than the last. Behind him, the front door closed with a soft click. But her voice remained with him. He'd done what he came to do. And somewhere, beyond the names, the credits, the noise of the world, a man who once took a silent fall now stood a little taller in memory. And Keanu, he walked on. Not because he was finished, but because there was always more to carry, more stories to return, more dignity to restore, and more promises to keep. And at first, and time had finally forgiven something that never should have been taken in the first place. The article hit the internet like a thunderclap. Clara Deschamps published it at midnight, Paris time, and by dawn, headlines around the world were quoting her lead. Hollywood hero Keanu Reeves exposes billion-dollar collector ring tied to stolen legacy watch. Within minutes, hashtags began to trend. Reeves truth, history int for sale, justice, justice, #indie. Clara hadn't held back. She named names. Victor Sarin, members of the Ark, and their financial sponsors who had quietly built an empire trafficking in heirlooms, silencing whistleblowers and turning stolen legacy into private decor. She cited the watch's confirmed serial number, its fraudulent relabeling, and the letter from the stuntman's daughter that painted a heartbreaking picture of industry abuse. It was all there. The photo of Keanu presenting the original receipt in the luxury store, the confrontation with the smug store manager, and the look on his face when he said on camera, "Some things belong with family." Within 24 hours, Geneva's glossy district saw something it had never seen before. Protesters. Local workers, students, activists, and even stunt performers from nearby film sets gathered outside the luxury shop. Their signs were blunt. "Not everything has a price. Give the watch back" was just the beginning. And the most powerful of all, scrawled in red across a canvas banner, "History isn't for sale." Keanu watched the news unfold from a quiet cafe in Vancouver, tucked behind a newspaper, his cap pulled low. He had returned from Canada only hours earlier after delivering the watch. He hadn't expected this. Clara had warned him there would be a response, but the scale of it and the passion caught him off guard. That's when the threat started. His publicist called first. "There's been a data breach. Someone tried to access your home address through SAG-AFTRA records. We've tightened security." Next came a series of anonymous texts. One said, Silence buys peace. Keep talking and the past won't be the only thing destroyed. Another simply read, "The Ark remembers." Keanu didn't flinch. He'd faced danger before, but this was different. These people weren't just defending a possession, they were defending a system, one where the powerful rewrote stories to suit their shelves. He thought about the stuntman who gave him everything when no one else would, about the daughter who cried as she held that timepiece, about the way Victor Sorin had said, "We'll ruin her too," and believed it. So when the interview request came from a major American network, Keanu didn't hesitate. He sat down, live on air, dressed in a simple black shirt. No makeup, no filter. "I didn't do this to be right," he said. "I did it to do right. The people behind the camera deserve more. The people who make stories possible deserve to have their stories told and not sold behind bulletproof glass." The moment went viral. Millions watched it on YouTube, clipped it on TikTok, and shared it across platforms. Overnight, Keanu wasn't just the face of a scandal. He became a symbol. For integrity, for loyalty, for standing up when silence would have been easier. More stunt workers came forward. Stories flooded in about broken bones, lost paychecks, NDAs signed under pressure. A quiet, aching chorus of forgotten names was finally being heard. And it wasn't just Hollywood listening anymore. Film unions in Los Angeles and New York released joint statements calling for a full review of past safety violations and industry-weighted compensation reforms for stunt performers. Producers who once ignored crew injuries now found themselves under pressure from both the media and a newly awakened public. Suddenly, the issue wasn't just about a single watch or a private collector's ring. It was about justice, long denied. A week after the broadcast, Geneva's luxury watch district began to feel the consequences. 3 elite stores quietly shuttered their VIP rooms. Anonymous tips led to the seizure of unregistered heirlooms held in vaults linked to the Ark. Clara Deschamps' exposé had teeth, and it bit deeper than anyone expected. A Swiss senator even called for an international review of how cultural artifacts were privatized under false pretenses. But for Keanu, the cost was personal. A production he was attached to went on hold indefinitely. Sponsors pulled out of a charity event he'd supported for years, citing unforeseen reputational concerns. Rumors swirled that studios were uneasy about casting him in large roles, fearing controversy. He read the headlines and let them pass. He'd made his choice, and the price of truth was a bill he'd pay with quiet resolve. Still, it wasn't all isolation. Messages began pouring in from around the world. Young filmmakers, retired crew members, actors who remembered the man Keanu had defended. One email read, "My dad worked with him on a shoot in the 90s. Said he was the only guy who checked if the wires were secured right. Thank you for not letting him be forgotten." Another simply said, "You gave us dignity." The most moving note came from a young stuntwoman named Jess in Atlanta. She'd seen the interview and sent a short video of her standing in front of a crowd at a local film school. "We used to be told to stay quiet," she said. "Now we tell our stories. Because if Keanu Reeves can risk everything to protect one crew member's memory, we can stand up for each other too." The phrase, "do it to do right," became a mantra. People printed it on t-shirts, spray painted it on alley walls behind old theaters, and posted it beneath images of their calloused hands and bruised arms from stunt training. The movement had become something greater than Keanu ever imagined. And through it all, he stayed mostly silent. No press tours, no grand declarations. Just the occasional message, like one he shared on a quiet afternoon from his back porch. A story isn't over just because someone tries to hide it. The truth has a way of finding light. That quote, too, spread like wildfire. Outside the Geneva shop, protesters remained. Tourists began taking photos not of the store's watches, but of the people standing outside with signs. Every day at noon, someone read a name aloud. One name from the list of unsung stuntmen and women who had been injured, ignored, or erased. One day, a French stuntwoman read a single line before she broke down in tears. Today we remember Alain Fournier. He died rigging a crane shot for a movie no one remembers, but we do. The crowd responded with a slow, thunderous applause. Victor Sorin had tried to bury a legacy under silence, money, and fear. But in trying to erase a name, he had amplified a cause. Keanu never spoke of Sorin again. He didn't need to. The world was already speaking louder than he ever could. The invitation arrived without fanfare. No gold embossing, no grand language. Just a plain envelope on thick cream paper, postmarked from Zurich. Keanu sat at his desk in Los Angeles, sunlight warming the edge of the envelope, hesitating before opening it. Inside was a single card. A message printed in black serif letters centered in the middle. To those who value time, not just possession. The art collection will be publicly dissolved. Final auction, Geneva, December 3rd. For a moment, Keanu didn't move. He read the words again slowly. The Ark. Dissolving. Months had passed since the confrontation, since Clara's expose detonated across news outlets, and since the story of the stolen stunt watch, the cover-up, and the silent abuse within the stunt industry forced Hollywood to confront its ghosts. The store that once dismissed him was now a husk, shuttered behind frosted windows and lawsuits. And now this, the final chapter. Keanu leaned back in his chair. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't wanted more. The watch he came for was returned, the promise kept, the story told. But the invitation wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. He flew to Geneva quietly. No press, no entourage. Just him, his coat, and a small notebook he always carried. Filled with names of people he owed, people who helped him become more than just a face on a screen. Somewhere in that notebook was one name he rarely spoke aloud. Joseph Reeves, his grandfather. The man had served in World War II, a train engineer turned soldier who died before Keanu ever met him. All Keanu had were the stories, passed down by his mother. Joseph had carried a silver pocket watch into battle, a keepsake, engraved with a line from a letter he'd once written to Keanu's grandmother. Every second with you was worth the war. The watch was lost during the Allied retreat through Italy. Stolen or buried, no one knew. It was one of those family mysteries that faded over time, half folklore, half grief. But Laurent had mentioned something weeks ago, quietly, offhand. A silver pocket watch, unusual engraving. Resurfaced years ago in a private Swiss estate. Never listed, never sold, just acquired. Keanu had written it off as coincidence, a trick of memory. Until now, the auction hall was held in an old concert chamber, where the stained glass windows filtered afternoon light into soft columns. Keanu sat in the back row as collectors took their seats, some familiar faces from tabloids, others known only by their numbered paddles. The Ark collection was unlike any other. Each piece bore decades of history, watches worn by generals, artists, scientists, and revolutionaries. Some watches bore blood, others bore secrets. Lot 145 was called Early, a silver pocket watch described simply as mid-century military issue. Unknown engraving. Keanu leaned forward. He didn't blink as the watch was brought forward in a velvet case. Didn't move as the bidding opened. He raised his hand once. The room was silent. No one bid against him. No one dared. Sold. After the final gavel struck and the murmurs of collectors gave way to the rustle of papers and clinks of wine glasses, Keanu stayed seated. The case was handed to him discreetly by a white-gloved attendant, no questions asked, no fanfare offered. He opened it slowly, the silver watch resting in midnight blue velvet, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. He lifted it carefully, holding it in both hands. His fingers brushed the faint engraving on the back. "Every second with you was worth the war." The words hit harder than he expected. They weren't just etched in metal, they were etched in memory. His mother's voice came back to him in fragments. Bedtime stories of a brave man who drove supply trains under fire, a man who wrote poetry to his wife from muddy foxholes, a man whose courage wasn't about violence, but about keeping others alive. Keanu closed his eyes. He hadn't realized how much of his own strength came from a man he never met. Later that evening, away from the auction hall and its gilded whispers, Keanu stood outside a small museum in Lausanne. It was quiet, unassuming. A place that honored the lives of soldiers not through weapons or medals, but through the letters they wrote, the drawings they made, and the personal items they carried across enemy lines. He didn't ask for a ceremony, didn't alert the press. He just walked in and asked to speak to the curator. An hour later, the watch sat under a warm light inside a glass case. A small plaque would be installed the next day. Donated in honor of Joseph Reeves, 19181944. For every man who worked in silence, whose time mattered. The curator, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, asked him softly, "Was he your father?" Keanu shook his head. "My grandfather. I never met him." She nodded. Sometimes, those are the ones who leave the deepest imprint. As Keanu walked back into the cold night, he felt something inside settle. Not relief, not victory, just peace. Quiet, steady peace. But the story wasn't finished. A message was waiting for him when he returned to his hotel. It wasn't from Laurent or Clara or any of the journalists still picking through the wreckage of the Ark's downfall. It was unsigned. A plain white envelope slid under his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. "The Ark may be gone, but you've awakened others. There are more collections, more buried truths. You've cracked open something older than you realize." At the bottom was a name. Monsieur Delacroix. He recognized it. The name of a financier who vanished from public life in the 1980s after rumors swirled of lost art, war loot, and classified transactions during Cold War diplomacy. No one had heard from him in decades. But now his name was here, and the implication was clear. The Ark had been one circle. There were others. Keanu folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his notebook, behind the page that held his grandfather's name. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew this. The past doesn't stay buried forever, and sometimes history isn't just about honoring the dead. Sometimes it's about protecting the living from the people who believe they own time itself. The call came just as twilight wrapped the sky in dusky blues. Keanu had been sitting by the window of his quiet Vancouver retreat, watching the wind stir the pine trees, when his phone vibrated on the table beside him. He answered immediately when he saw her name. Emily, the daughter of the man whose memory had sent him across the world. Her voice was unsteady, but urgent. "Keanu, it's the watch." He straightened in his chair. "What happened?" "I opened it. The back plate, just a polish inside." Her words were fast and breathless. "It's been ticking beautifully, but I wanted to clean it, to honor it, you know. I've handled old pieces before. I was gentle." A pause. Then I noticed something behind the inner dial. Hidden. Keanu's breath caught. "It was a note," she whispered. "Folded paper. So small, but it was his handwriting, Keanu. I recognized it instantly." A chill crept up his spine. His mentor had been a man of precision, a craftsman. He didn't hide things lightly. "What does it say?" Emily exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath for days. There was the sound of a paper unfolding on the line. Then her voice, quiet but steady, began to read. If you're reading this, then something has happened to me that wasn't supposed to. Don't believe the accident report. I didn't trip. I didn't miscalculate. Someone wanted me out of the way. I was documenting things, injuries, pay records, exploitation. They knew I was going to speak up. Keanu closed his eyes. Every suspicion he'd carried since Emily first contacted him was now taking shape in undeniable ink. Emily continued reading, her voice growing more fragile as she went. This watch isn't just sentimental. It's a ledger. The serial number ties back to every person who touched it. I left messages hidden elsewhere, but this is the heart. If you need a name to start, look for Victor Sorin. He's not just a collector, he's a broker. And if I disappear, it means he got close. Silence. Keanu's hands curled slowly into fists. The truth had been there all along. And now, it had a voice. Emily's voice cracked on the other end. Keanu, this changes everything. It wasn't just about the watch. He knew he was in danger. He knew someone was after him. And he trusted you to find it, Keanu said gently. He trusted you to finish what he started. I don't know what to do next, she said softly. I do, Keanu replied. We're going to take this to the authorities. The letter, the receipt, the serial number, all of it. Clara will help. This isn't just a family's closure anymore, it's evidence. Emily took a shaky breath. Okay, let's do it. For him. That night, Keanu made the necessary arrangements. A secure legal envelope was prepared for transport. He called Clara Deschamps and told her everything. She listened in silence and then said the words he'd hoped to hear. This will change the entire case. Now they'll have no choice but to listen. 2 days later, Keanu met Emily outside a modest provincial courthouse nestled in downtown Toronto. The morning air was cold but clear, and Emily held the watch case like it was something sacred. Her fingers trembled as she handed it over to the attending federal investigator. The moment was silent, solemn. Inside that watch wasn't just a piece of mechanical beauty. It was the voice of a man long buried by silence. The investigator, a seasoned man with years in fraud and criminal investigations, treated the note with care. He read through it twice, then looked up at Emily. This is powerful, he said. We'll authenticate the handwriting, match it to employment records, and pursue a formal inquiry into Victor Sorin's business history and affiliations. This could shift the entire context of the prior case. Emily nodded slowly, tears glinting in her eyes. Please, just let my father be remembered for the truth. He wasn't careless. He was brave. Clara joined them moments later, carrying a press packet sealed in a leather folder. I've already forwarded scans to my legal team and a copy to the Geneva authorities. The Swiss investigators are now cooperating under pressure from public outcry. The timing is perfect. Keanu placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. You've done something incredible, he said. You gave your father his voice back. She smiled through her tears. You kept your promise. The next weeks moved swiftly. International journalists descended on the story with renewed intensity. Clara's updated piece, titled A Watchmaker's Warning, went viral overnight. The story captured the heartbreak of a man silenced for doing the right thing, and the quiet heroism of a daughter and an actor who refused to let him be forgotten. Legal experts weighed in across cable networks. The note's contents were verified by 2 forensic analysts. Its implications were undeniable. Victor Sorin, already reeling from public disgrace, was subpoenaed by both Canadian and international courts. While his high-powered lawyers stalled and danced around the charges, the cumulative evidence, the watch, the letter, the threats, was too deeply embedded in the public record to ignore. Eventually, a court ruled that Emily was owed significant damages, not only for the theft of the heirloom, but for the defamation of her father's professional legacy. Though no amount of money could replace the years of loss, the verdict delivered something far more meaningful: validation. A judge described the note in court as a quiet act of courage from a man surrounded by fear. Emily wept as the decision was read, and Keanu stood beside her, not as a celebrity, but as a friend who had fought to make things right. In a private moment afterward, she gave him the letter to hold. "I think he meant for both of us to read this," she said. "Without you, I'd still be staring at a watch I didn't understand." Keanu looked down at the folded paper, now framed in protective glass. He saw more than just ink. He saw the weight of years carried on bruised shoulders. A man who took hits so others didn't have to. A man who died trying to protect the truth. That night, Keanu walked alone beneath the street lamps of downtown Toronto. Snow had started to fall, light and slow. He passed by an old clockmaker's shop and paused, watching the second hand tick its quiet rhythm. He didn't need the world to know what he'd done. It wasn't for headlines or applause. It was for a man who once told him between takes, "Time reveals everything, kid. Just be patient." Time had revealed it all. And now, finally, justice had caught up. The ballroom shimmered in warm golds and silvers, the kind of elegance that usually came with red carpets and rehearsed speeches. But tonight was different. The gala wasn't for leading men or blockbuster directors. It was for the unseen, the unsung, the crew members, stunt performers, lighting techs, makeup artists, and background heroes who built the dreams audiences clapped for. Keanu Reeves stood off to the side, quiet as always. His presence at the charity event had stirred whispers, but he hadn't come for attention. When the host announced a surprise tribute, the room turned as Keanu's name was called. Applause filled the air, genuine and rising. But Keanu didn't smile. He walked to the stage slowly, adjusting the jacket of his simple black suit. The MC read a brief speech commending Keanu's integrity, his years of silent support for stunt professionals, and the recent recovery of a historic timepiece that had sparked global awareness. Then came the moment, a small, understated award made of glass and wood, carved with the words, "In honor of those who work in the shadows." Keanu took it with both hands, nodded, and stepped to the microphone. He looked out over the room, not at celebrities, but at grips and riggers with worn hands, camera operators with calloused fingers, former stunt doubles who now walked with limps. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't joke. He just began. "I don't think I deserve this," he said, voice low but steady. "But I know who does." The room quieted further. "There are names we'll never hear," he continued. "Men and women who took hits, jumped off buildings, rigged wire poles, and fell harder than most people ever will. Some of them limped home. Some of them never made it home. They were told it was just part of the job, that bruises were normal, that broken bones didn't get billing." He paused, the silence hanging heavy now. "So if you'll let me, I'd like to take a moment. Not for me, but for them." He stepped back from the mic, folded his hands, bowed his head. The entire ballroom followed. A full 30 seconds passed, unbroken. No coughs, no whispers, just reverence. When Keanu finally raised his head again, the spotlight caught something subtle. On his wrist wasn't a luxury timepiece or some statement of wealth. It was aged, humble, and familiar. His mentor's watch. The same one he'd chased across continents. The same one he'd rescued from silence. The engraving beneath the glass caught the light for a fleeting second. Time forgives all things. He left the award on the podium, walked down the steps without another word. Outside, the night air met him like an old friend. No cameras, no interviews, just peace. Behind him, applause picked up again, but he didn't turn around. He just walked. Across the world, the aftermath of the story continued to ripple. Victor Sorin, once untouchable, was now under federal investigation for fraud, trafficking stolen heirlooms, and obstruction of justice. His smile no longer graced luxury watch expos. His name was now a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors by collectors who feared exposure. Clara Deschamps, meanwhile, stood at the heart of something bigger than she'd imagined. Her documentary, The Time We Buried, had become a cultural firestorm. Screened at universities, cited by labor rights advocates, and shortlisted for international awards. One critic called it a quiet revolution dressed in ticking seconds. In every frame, Clara had let the evidence speak. The letter from the mentor, the scan of the watch's serial number, the boardroom confrontation, and above all, the silent dignity of a man who refused to let time erase what mattered. At the center of it all was Keanu. Though you wouldn't know it from his schedule. He declined interview requests, avoided red carpets, and turned down multiple brand offers. When asked why he wouldn't endorse luxury timepieces after the story went viral, he simply said, "Time shouldn't be bought." In Geneva, the watch store that once humiliated him had changed hands. Its new owners, perhaps recognizing the shifting tide, remodeled the space. Gone were the velvet ropes and hushed exclusivity. The back room was gone entirely. In its place, a quiet gallery had been installed, one wall dedicated to the history of working-class watchmakers, and at the center of it all, a plaque in honor of those who returned time to its rightful owners. Tourists began stopping there not for purchases, but to reflect. A few would recognize the story. Fewer still would recognize the man who had made it happen. In a photo snapped discreetly weeks later, Keanu was seen standing outside the shop, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. No one approached him. No one needed to. He just stood there for a moment, then walked on. Back in Canada, the mentor's daughter had begun setting up a scholarship in her father's name. "For young stunt performers with nowhere to land but dreams," she wrote in her proposal. She mailed Keanu a thank you note with only one sentence: "You kept more than your promise. You kept his memory safe." That meant more to him than any headline ever could. Later that winter, Keanu returned to his cabin outside Los Angeles. No entourage, just snow, silence, and time. He placed the mentor's watch in a small box, wrapped it in cloth, and set it on the shelf beside a photograph of the two of them, arms slung over each other between takes, grinning in dusty stunt pads. Beneath the photo, he'd scribbled the words, "You caught me when I fell." As the fire crackled in the hearth behind him, Keanu sat quietly in the dim light, not needing to be anywhere else. There was no speech left to give, no camera left to face. Just peace. Sometimes justice came late. Sometimes it came not with noise, but with stillness. And sometimes, when the world forgets, someone remembers. Keanu stood near the edge of the stage, the lights of the charity gala casting a soft gold halo over the room. He wasn't wearing the tuxedo most of the attendees had donned. Instead, he wore a simple black suit, the kind that blended in, the kind that didn't demand attention. It wasn't about him tonight. It never really had been. The host had just announced his name and applause rippled across the crowd, but Keanu didn't move at first. He hesitated, looking down at his wrist. The vintage watch there wasn't ornate or flashy. The leather strap was worn with time, and the metal face bore tiny scratches that no camera could catch. But it ticked. Steady. Honest. The very one his mentor had once worn. The same watch that had been stolen, hidden, and nearly lost forever. The same watch that carried a secret and a farewell. When Keanu finally stepped up to the microphone, the room quieted. People leaned in, expecting a speech about film or legacy. But instead, Keanu looked across the room at the crew members standing in the back, the lighting techs, the stunt doubles, the grips, the drivers, the ones who never walked the red carpet. "I'm grateful for this," he said quietly, holding the small plaque in his hand. "But I'd like to take a moment, not for me, but for the men and women who fall so that others can rise, the ones who bleed behind the scenes and break bones for stories that aren't even their own." There was silence then, reverent. Keanu bowed his head, and the entire room followed. A full minute, not for celebrity, not for fame, but for honor. When the lights returned and the music resumed, Keanu stepped off the stage and exited into the cool night. No fanfare, no interviews, just the sound of his shoes on the pavement and the quiet ticking of the watch on his wrist. That moment marked something more than closure. It was a reminder of what he'd fought for, not revenge, not recognition, but truth, justice, memory. The scandal around Victor Soren hadn't disappeared. He was still under investigation, and the legal system was grinding its way toward accountability. Clara's documentary had gone viral, nominated for 3 international awards, and the Geneva store had been completely rebranded. Now under new ownership, a small brass plaque sat by the entrance that read, "This place once forgot who time belongs to. May it now remember." But Keanu never spoke publicly about the case again. He didn't need to. He had done what heroes do. Stood up, quietly, for someone who no longer could. For a promise made. For a daughter's grief. For the dignity of those who had been silenced. This had never truly been a story about a watch. It was a story about what we hold sacred. A name etched into metal. A final letter tucked behind a dial. A truth whispered behind closed doors, waiting to be found. Sometimes, the people with the greatest wealth aren't the ones with private jets or hidden collections. They're the ones who remember what time is really worth. Who know that legacy isn't built on what you keep, but what you return. Have you ever stood up for something quietly, even when no one noticed? When the world wasn't watching but your conscience was? He could have walked away and no one would have blamed him. It wasn't his name in that dusty receipt, or his father who wore that broken watch, or his dignity that had been dismissed across the polished counters of a showroom that mistook wealth for worth. But Keanu knew something deeper. He knew that time, left unchallenged, erases the quiet sacrifices, the broken ribs under stunt vests, the fathers who vanished from credits but not from memory, the moments that mattered most, gone, unless someone chose to hold them. So he stayed, not for recognition, but for redemption, for a man who once stood behind the camera and caught Keanu when he fell, for a daughter who whispered into the dial of a vintage watch, asking if her father's time still meant something, and for every forgotten hand that helped build the very films the world applauded. That's what the story was really about. Not luxury or revenge, not even justice in the traditional sense. It was about what we choose to remember when the applause fades, what we choose to protect when no one is clapping. Clara's documentary aired quietly at first, tucked between festival showings and limited streams. But its power grew, shared across forums and platforms, passed from voice to voice like a secret finally being sung out loud. Letters poured in, from retired stunt performers, from widows, from daughters, from men who had carried cameras, cables, bruises, and silence. And in all of it, Keanu never claimed a podium. He never stood above. He simply nodded, once again, and said, "Thank you." They asked him once in an interview what the watch had meant to him now that it was returned. He'd smiled softly. "It was never mine. That's the point." He wore no trophy that night, no gold, just a weathered timepiece ticking gently against his wrist. You could hear it if you leaned in close, a whisper from the past still moving forward, because time forgives all things, even silence, even delay, even forgetting, if we dare to remember again. Oh, to you, the one listening. Have you ever stood up for something quietly, even when no one noticed? Maybe you've spoken up for a coworker, protected a memory, kept a promise that seemed invisible to the world. If so, you've done something sacred. You've returned time to its rightful owners. We hope this story reminded you of the quiet power you hold. And if you believe stories like this matter, share it. Talk about it. Pass it along, like a letter that was never meant to be lost. Because who we remember and why can change everything. And now, a simple question. What story do you want to see next with Keanu? Tell us in the comments. We're listening, always. Thank you for being part of this story. And thank you for remembering.